Okay, Stephanie, it looks like most of the people have signed on. I think we should probably go ahead and get started. Hello, Stephanie, can you hear? Okay, Stephanie, if you are speaking, we cannot hear you. Make sure that you are not on mute. Okay, Stephanie says she's calling back in, and we still have people logging on. Okay, we will get started in just a moment. Our presenter had to log off, and she's logging back on again to get a good audio. Okay, Stephanie, I see you logged on. Can you hear us? Okay, just a minute. She's trying to get her audio on. Stephanie, can you hear?
Yes.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
No.
Okay, Stephanie, can you hear?
Ginny, can you hear any of us?
Yes, I can.
Okay,
I can. I don't know what has happened with Stephanie. Stephanie, can you send me a chat and see if you can hear, or let us know if you can hear? Okay, but we can't hear you, Stephanie. Can you check to make sure that you're not on mute? I made sure that you're not. I took everyone off. Okay, Stephanie, can you hear?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. Okay, we can hear you now.
Oh, you can hear me now? Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you. Okay, we can go.
Okay, sorry. I've been here and something happened. I don't know why, but I could hear you perfectly, but you couldn't hear me.
Okay. All right.
Okay, good.
Good.
All right.
Okay, and we are being recorded, so we are ready to go when you're ready.
Okay, great. So I'll share my desktop now, and we're ready to begin. So I'm sorry about the delay. Ginny and I had tried this all out before, and it was perfect, but I guess there was something funny with the settings. So I'm really happy to be here today, and together with me is Patrick Callahan, who's been working with Climate Change Partnership that's focused on educating adults about climate change. And we got interested in games, and I'll explain a little bit more of that background to begin with, but I just wanted to also say that as one of the original CAMEL, I'm really happy to see that so many people are participating in these webinars. It's really great. Our plan is that Ginny suggested that we just run pretty much straight through the presentation, and then what we'll do is we'll take questions at the end. If you have questions in between, I think you can let Ginny know and she can get in touch with us directly. So is the audio okay so far?
Yes, it's good.
Okay, good. Okay, so the main foundation for the work that we'll be presenting today is through this Polar Learning and Responding partnership. And our goal with this is to transform climate from a contentious issue to a personal and community challenge. And we decided to, when we first were thinking about applying for this planning grant, we were thinking about, what aspect of climate change to address. And we thought we really wanted to focus in on the poles, because people think of the poles when they think of climate change. The images that come to mind, as Tony Syritz and others have shown, are melting ice, flooding coastlines, polar bears losing their habitat, and so it immediately comes to mind. The other important issue is that changes at the poles affect us around the rest of the world. So it's an issue that both has sort of salience and resonance with people, and it's also one that is connecting the poles with global change is something that's really important as well. We also wanted to reach adults, and we were focusing in on adults because there's a lot of activities and a lot of resources that have been deployed for K-12 education, but not as much as has been basically mobilized for adults. And in the way we define adults, it's from college students on up, and that includes pre- and in-service teachers. And through that, we're also engaging sort of indirectly, with the K-12 population. We immediately basically settled on games. And the reason for games is because they help people to engage in problem solving. And this was something that we wanted to do. We wanted to try to move away from the standard formats of reaching people, the sage on the stage, or, giving lectures, providing more information. And we wanted to get people to come mobilize their own, actually, capacity and apply it towards climate change. And so games and game-like tools are increasingly being used in within diverse situations. People have talked about war games for a long time, and more recently it's, medical mysteries are being solved through use of games. The other thing is that games help people master challenge and explore really complex environments. And that's something that came out very strongly in our evaluation, which I'll talk about later on. One thing that when I talk about games, people often say, oh, but, aren't most game players boys who are 17 years old or younger. And the statistics at the bottom of this slide show that that's not the case. They're only 13% of the game-playing population. You know, the average gamer, and these are computer games and video games together, is 37 years old, and 42% of all players are women. So, and adult women make up 37% of the game-playing population. So we really can reach, you know, adults through the use of games. I just wanted to mention, I won't go into this in any detail, but you have this for reference. Our partnership includes people in the climate sciences, both natural sciences and social sciences, and we span, you know, across the U.S. from the East Coast to Alaska. We have people in the learning and decision sciences, and actually Patrick is at Teachers College here in New York City that are bringing in learning theory and practice. We also have decision theory through the Columbia Center for Research on Environmental Decisions, and then we have practitioners. We have formal education practitioners, including myself and Patrick, and others at other academic institutions. We have informal education practitioners through the American Museum of Natural History and the International Arctic Research Center. And then we have gaming practitioners, in part through Ken Eklund, who who conceived of and implemented World Without Oil, and there is a CAMEL resource on this that Ginny has put together that I'll mention at the end. But we've also, in order to sort of leverage our investment and to try to get the games into the hands of different people, we've also connected with a variety of what we're calling catalytic associates, including Games for Change, which is a group that's working on developing games that have a social impact. The World Wildlife Fund, Global Arctic Program, and I won't go through all of these, but we've really found a lot of people who are very interested in working with us with this different approach in an informal as well as in a formal environment. When we first started putting the ideas together about what specific games we would develop, we basically talked with a lot of stakeholders. We had workshops, and we also interviewed key people on the phone or emailed back and forth with them. And what they came back to us with is, you know, they want a variety of approaches, so we shouldn't just put a lot of money into one game. Other people have tried this, and you know, you're either very successful or you're not. But they also wanted different ways to reach different people, and you'll see that we span from low-tech to high-tech for that reason. Making the issues local and more personal and telling them within the context of stories is important. This was something that was critical for us, was when the stakeholders said, we don't want to hear about climate, we want to hear about sustainable development. We want to hear about what can help us with our jobs, our health, the legacy of the environment we're leaving to our next generation. And so we frame the games in that direction. We also have, as I've mentioned, we have a focus on adults, and that's what the stakeholders said too. You know, they would like somebody to talk with them about this, this issue. And the important thing at the end, I talked about the problem-solving aspect, but one of the things that came through really strongly was, what are the trade-offs? You know, if you make this decision, what's going to happen? And if you are proactive in making decisions versus reactive in making decisions, how will that be different as well? And so we structured that into the games that we've developed. Another thing that we did was we based this in theory. So there's the Center for Research on Environmental Decisions has this really nice communication, psychology of climate change communication guide. And as you can see here, our various projects are mapped against that. And we consciously looked through and we sort of checked off, okay, yes, we're addressing this, can we address this or not? And it helped us a lot in sort of formulating our strategy as we put the games together. We also took a look at what is out there, and our focus at this point was on polar-related climate games and game-like resources. And you can go to our website, which is linked there, and you can download and take a look at the resources that we have online. So we have, you know, general educational resources, climate resources, ones that connect to polar and climate, and then a series of reference articles that our group found useful in thinking things through. Some of the top issues that we found when we did this inventory was that, as we knew in part going into the proposal, was that the vast majority of resources right now are targeting high school teachers. So that's why CAMEL in part, and also what we're doing here is different. Another thing is that the engaging simulations that facilitate collaborative problem solving are poorly represented. And so there really is this opportunity to do something with differently through game development and also deploying the existing games in different ways. So our overall framework is here. We are not just within this project focusing in on games. The three that I'll be talking about here today are shown in green, but I just want to say that this is within a framework of promoting access to data, to engaging communities and native leaders, and also professional development. And this is described more on the website where I gave you the link earlier. The games that I'll be talking about are the three on the right. One that we're tentatively calling Arctic Home, another one that is gamification of everyday activities. Another one is called Arctic Smartic. And both the Arctic Home and Arctic Smartic, the Arctic Smartic resource is currently listed on the CAMEL. The other two on the left I won't be talking about today, but I just wanted to mention them. So Future Coast is a serious reality game that we're proposing. If we get funded, we had the planning grant and we now have an implementation grant that's pending at NSF. But that would be a serious reality game looking at where the shoreline could be in, say, 2100 or 2070 and how people would adapt, just thinking of the future world. Another one is an iPad Android app that is based on Earth Observer, and this gives people access to data. And I can answer questions about these later if you have them. So as I mentioned earlier, people want a variety of games. And so we've purposely developed several spectra. So one is from awareness to decisions. And the Arctic Home game that I'll be talking about first is sort of on the left of this, and Arctic Smartic, which is just to the sort of towards the center, is promoting awareness. The Eco Impact Missions, which is the gamification project, is all the way on the other side that facilitates decision making, as you'll see later on. We also have tested these, and we think that they have a lot of potential for use in a variety of settings, and here I've gone from the classroom to the public. Basically, you know, as educators, you know that almost anything that's geared for the public can also be used in the classroom, but some of these have more of a classroom orientation than others. We also deliberately wanted to go from low tech to high tech. So, you know, we have the Android, iPad app that we're working on, but then we also have a very basic card game that is on the low tech side of things. So how did we integrate these games into formal education? We'll be talking mainly about three sort of pilot proof of concept activities that we've done over the past 2 years. Patrick will also mention, I think, some of his experience trying some of these out with high school teachers, which are in the high school with high school students, because he as a student teacher, he was interested in seeing how they would work, and that really helped us to sort of fine-tune how we handled the undergraduates as well. So we had 3 experiences in formal education. One was with undergraduate non-STEM majors, and this was a first-year seminar that I taught called Exploring the Poles, and I'll talk about that one first. Then we had an undergraduate course, which is an elective, and it was basically all junior and senior environmental majors, and that's called Responding to Climate Change. And that entire course, the entire syllabus for that, will be posted on CAMEL. Right now, Patrick will explain a little bit more, but it's posted in different places within the CAMEL website. And then we also had a chance to try out Arctic Smartic within the Masters in Climate and Society program at Columbia. They have a core course called Managing and Adapting to Climate, and I'll give you some feedback from what the students thought about that game. So the first game that I'll be talking about, we're tentatively calling Arctic Home, a card game of life and death at the end of the Earth. The basic idea is, this was one that I ran in my first-year seminar. So basically the students have a deck of cards where they can first build an Arctic food web. They, you deal out the cards, they build the food web as best they can, but none of them will have a complete food web based on the cards that they're dealt, so they need to trade cards. And this is called seasonal migration. And the students had a lot of fun with this. They really enjoyed building their food web, and they had a strong sense of sort of empathy or sort of pride in the food web that they wound up developing. We then, in order to get these alternate scenarios into the game, we use the Arctic Marine Shipping Assessment developmental scenarios. And here I think I can show you with the arrow here. It's this quadrant here where you have trade-offs between, you know, high trade, low trade, high governance, low governance. So they would draw one of these developmental scenarios, and then they would have to deal with a stress. And down here you see some of the stresses. So one of them was an oil spill, one was Arctic warming that was much more severe than expected, and another one was more of a mitigation one where an ice park was developed. And they had to deal with these different issues. So we've tried this game, you know, with the first year seminar. We also were able to test it with focus groups and with our team members, and so altogether we've tested it now with about 65 people. What we can say is that the game is fun and effective. Based on our evaluations that we've done thus far, people who play the game report that they develop an understanding of Arctic ecosystem function and vulnerability to climate change and other stress. And you can see some of the quotes here, which we thought were particularly interesting, is when you get the affective realm involved as well. So in one case, the person felt an adrenaline rush as they kept the possibility of a major disaster at the forefront of their mind. The other thing is that we have the students play this several different times, so they play it under different scenarios, and they get dealt different cards. And so after they play it the first time, they understand what the issues are, and they start strategizing how can they build a food web that's more robust. Another quote here is that, bringing in competition is really helpful, and this person, loves games, and they really enjoy building the web and seeing the relationships between the organisms. We tested people in the focus group pre and post, and they definitely had a lot more content knowledge immediately after the game. In the case of the students, I asked them just anecdotally at the end of the course. We played the game at one of the very first days, and then towards the end of the course, I asked them, what do you remember? And the main thing that they remembered was ice algae. They had no idea how vulnerable the whole Arctic ecosystem was to ice algae and how important that was. Just to go back, I should say I made this Arctic-Antarctic home. We are developing an Antarctic ecosystem card game as well. So the next thing I'll talk about is this undergraduate course for majors, and I'll start. You can see on the left we started the class with adaptation and response options, and we ran through several case studies. After the midterm break, we talked about mitigation. So I'll be talking about the Arctic case study, which is SMARTIC, and then I'll hand off to Patrick Callahan, who will talk about 3 games that we did not develop through the Polar Project, but that we've integrated into the class.
And real quick, I just want to mention that this is Patrick, and good afternoon, everybody. Just want to mention that, and I'm going to go through this again later on with my slides, but you'll see that these are all posted as CAMEL resources, and they're under different categories. So, for example, the Arctic case study, well, all the case studies are identified as case study resources. The activities in green are the games, and those are posted as game resources. Then anything else that doesn't say case study or isn't highlighted in green are posted as lectures. And as Stephanie mentioned before, the entire syllabus will be on there, more than likely by the end of the week. Okay, so I'll talk first about SMARTIC. So SMARTIC is an acronym. It's Strategic Management of Resources in Times of Change. We have an Arctic version that we've tested now with probably around 80 or 90 people. We also developed an Antarctic version, and that one we've tested with about 20 people, including people on a tourist cruise to Antarctica. And those are the images that you see to the right. These are not undergraduate students, but you can see that they're very actively engaged. So the foundation for SMARTIC is marine spatial planning, and this is something that is but it's an emerging framework that people are using to try to literally get people to the same table. And all they do, and you can see this, the people doing this here, is they roll the dice, they're assigned a role, stakeholder role. In the case of the tourists, they were actually given a background sheet about their role, and they were given the distribution of their stakeholder interests, like where oil might be or where polar bear habitat might be in 2050 or so.
And then they have to literally, and you can see the woman with the pen there, they literally drew on a map, on an acetate overlay, where their interests were. And then they had to negotiate with people with competing interests, how they were going to solve their competing interests. They then had to, once they addressed all of these, they were posed with a challenge. Again, there was an oil spill or something like that, and they had to figure out how they were going to deal with that and how they could avoid problems like that in the future. So how they could, what policies would help them to become more resilient to such stresses. The neat thing about this game is the foundation for the game is Google Images. I'm not, we're not georeferencing the stakeholder interests or anything. So people can, you can download a map and you can circle it on another one. And this has a lot of advantages. We are considering doing one that is through a data management system, but right now the very, almost cut and pasty one is working just fine. So what I'll give you, I'll sort of go through fairly quickly here because we had to start a little bit late. Some of the evaluation results. The main takeaway message that I have from these is that the participants are really gaining a lot of knowledge, and they also are enjoying and feeling empowered by the experience. So highlighted in green, people were exposed and became aware of different factors. They realized that not everybody is in conflict with each other everywhere. They had to think about both the short run and the long run, and they figured out that, you wanted to have kind of a rolling approach potentially to management practices, that there's some areas that have difficulties sooner rather than later. In terms of their skills and sort of affective outcomes, the students, in this case, they said that they really learned how to analyze and interpret what they had read in class. And they were very excited about doing this because it felt very practical for them. And they felt hopeful and optimistic and also better equipped in the coming years to work out solutions. In this case, with the students, we asked them about the whole adaptation section. And so before we go on to mitigation, which Patrick will talk about, I just wanted to present some results. So we ran through a series of different game or game-like activities. And you can see the spatial planning one, which I'll circle right now. This was the one that the students found the most effective. So they said if they had to come up with an adaptation plan for some region or sector, they would use the marine spatial planning. Okay, I'll just talk about the climate and society students because we also engaged them in working with SMARTIC. So they were at a higher level. So these are international students who were actually preparing for decision making. And what they said was that they really liked to see the scope of the problem. They got an impression about the complexity and how things interplay. They realized that the right decision is not always black and white. Just moving to the next slide, they began to think that, everybody should consider dealing with climate change from their stakeholder perspective, that people will be affected both directly and indirectly. Another one that I thought was interesting is that they said that the interests of groups may not be simple to predict. So that was interesting, was that, they were sometimes surprised. They had expected somebody to come in with one scenario, and then they actually came in with another one, and that was really interesting to them. And then because with the master's students, we also gave them these different governmental regimes, they realized that if you have a strong government, then you're going to have a different kind of outcome, obviously, than a weak government. One note I'll just make here, because I've been talking about the positives. With the master's students, we had them roll dice for the role play, and that worked very well. But then we tried having them roll dice at one point for the outcome. For the conflict resolution, and that did not work. So you need to match the level of your gameplay to the level of the students. Okay, so I'll turn it over to Patrick now, and he'll start first with the climate challenge.
Okay, so the first game that we introduced to the students occurred in the mitigation section of the response to climate change class. So it was probably actually about the fourth session in. So students had been introduced to climate mitigation, and this particular game is tied in with the carbon capture and sequestration class. So if you look in CAML under lecture resources, you can find the carbon capture and sequestration lesson plan that ties in with this particular game. And then gameplay instructions, which Jorg Matter and I developed, were linked to the game and are on Camel as a game resource. So you can find that there, the specific instructions. So in this game, so one of the things that Stephanie had tasked me to do was to, was have to find games and to do some research because we weren't developing, specific games for the response to climate change class, rather sourcing them from pre-existing classes or from other resources. So this is a BBC game, and what's great about it, what I enjoy when I played and with the game before introducing to the students, is the fact that it tied in with all the different stakeholder influences that they'd been previously working with in the adaptation section of the class, be it the New York City case study or the Arctic case study. So the idea of stakeholders plays a major role in this game. So just to give you a really quick background on it, so what it does is it gives students an understanding of how to balance carbon capture emissions with the resources and economic interests of their the country they represent. So they're a leader. They represent a leader, and they have to make specific policy decisions, where they negotiate with other European leaders. So just real quick, these are some of the reflections that students had about the game, and what the major takeaways for us were that they were able to apply what they learned, both in the adaptation section as well as the mitigation section of the course in the game, that they understood how difficult it is to satisfy all the stakeholders involved. They were excited about the fact that they were put in charge, that they were the leader, that they had to make decisions, and that there were clear consequences for the decisions they made. And also, the game deals with a variety of different sectors, and so having to tackle all these different issues was quite challenging, so the problem-solving aspect was something the students enjoyed. So the next game we played, which is tied into the geoengineering class, was the CEO2 game. So the CEO2 game, the real object of it was for students to understand the challenges and complexities related to reducing carbon emissions. So now, instead of being a national leader, they are the CEO of a corporation. So they have the choice between being an automobile manufacturer or being involved with a chemical manufacturer or a utility company, energy company. And so they chose between those three. And then based on that, they had to make decisions that were going to satisfy environmentalists, that were going to satisfy their the stockholders, and basically anyone involved in a corporation, they had to find some way to satisfy them. And so students in particular enjoy this game. When we talk about the evaluation, we'll talk about how the different games worked and how they felt about each in comparison to each other, but they particularly enjoyed this one. So one of the things they appreciated was how they had to balance economic profitability with environmental sustainability in the corporate realm. And so it seemed particularly challenging, so there was a real problem-solving aspect here, where how do we make the company happy, those people who have money invested in, as well as the environmentalists? How do we go ahead and anticipate trends in scientific breakthroughs? That was something that they found particularly satisfying. As well as how all the different interests overlap and collide, and really how do you go about negotiating these varied interests. So the final game we played was the wedge game. And so this is the game developed by Princeton University, and that Jorg Matter and I went ahead and adapted the instructions that are available at the Princeton site. And so what this exercise did was it really made students recognize what is the magnitude of carbon emissions. And how is it that we can effectively go ahead and cut carbon emissions? So students worked in teams to develop skills to negotiate a solution that are both physically plausible and politically acceptable. And then ultimately they had to defend their solutions to larger groups. So the students were broken up into different groups, and then they had to then defend their particular solution to the rest of the class. So some of the reflections that came out of that, this particular game, was that it's a very large scale, carbon emissions. It made them realize just how enormous the problem is. They've been hearing a lot about it. A lot of the students are environmental science students. They had the background, but they didn't necessarily recognize the scope of the issues. This game helped to put that into perspective. People with different backgrounds view carbon reduction strategies very differently. So students who were engineers or students who were environmental scientists, they came at it from different perspectives, and that really mirrored the real world. And one thing that was really hopeful about it for them was the fact that the challenge isn't insurmountable, that there are actual technology and strategies available that can help to mitigate these issues.
So our course evaluations, the first year that we taught this class, we only had 9 students in it, and you can see that even though the class was taught in a 2-hour, so it was an hour and 10-minute actually meeting time once a week, most of the students agreed or strongly agreed that they learned more from this course than a usual 3-point lecture class. When we asked them, would you have preferred to have more lectures and fewer activities, most of them disagreed. And then we asked them, basically, do you feel empowered to respond to climate change? And most of them strongly agreed or agreed. The one strongly disagree, we should just mention the first time that we taught the class, I think we all felt that the adaptation section was very strong, but the mitigation section was not as strong. And so, we understand where the student might be coming from. The second time we taught the class, we decided to run it with 2 75-minute meetings a week instead of the 110-minute block. We increased the amount of background information provided by professors in class. The students said, look, you all know a lot about this, give us some more information. And we ran all the games in class instead of in the past. The first year we ran some in the class and some outside of the class. This meant that we wound up reducing the amount of student research prior to class. We also increased the student reflection after the activities because we had been impressed with what the impact of that was the first time around. And we're right in the middle. We don't yet have the course evaluation results for this spring, but our impression is that it wasn't as successful this year. So for games to work at this upper level, for majors, the students really need to be engaged in researching the roles and issues themselves. I think in a way we provided too much scaffolding the second time around. The other thing was there was kind of a glitch in the time for the class, and so we didn't have as many students even. We only had 6 this time around, and we had really been expecting to have some variation in game results that the students could discuss. Patrick, did you want to mention anything here?
Yeah, I think certainly having a critical mass of students is really important. That was a major takeaway for us, and that's something that, I'm going to talk a little bit later about my experience in the high school, but that was one of the great opportunities of using these games in high school. They have a much bigger class, so they get much more varied results in a classroom of 25 to 30 students.
Right, so they get to see the trade-offs and different perspectives more that way. Okay, so I'll just want to move on to two other categories before we end. So one of them is there's a real-world action game that's under development by Joey Lee. He's one of our Polar team members, and he has a paper that's in press right now called Greenify Real-World Missions for Climate Education. And the basic idea with this is to use social networking. So, can you ideally, develop and deliver advice among peers for climate mitigation and decision-making? So a little bit of background on this. What he was intending to do was to gamify everyday behavior. So he wanted students or anybody, adults, young adults, older adults, whatever, to be able to increase their knowledge and understanding, to make climate change a relevant and practical and personal issue so that you inspire change among your social circle, to motivate positive decisions that are tracked directly as part of the game itself. And this is what's really kind of fun from a research perspective, is you can see what people choose to do and how they rate different missions. So the kinds of missions are here. There's action missions, there's learning and debate missions, and there's sharing and reflection missions. And he actually tried this out with some students. So he had 26 adults from 2 graduate level classes. There were 8 men, 18 women, and this was a 6-week study where he did before and after analysis. And what he found was that participants changed their behaviors and learned practical actions to influence climate change. Nearly all participants, 82, almost 83%, reported that Greenify changed their behaviors. One thing I should say, of course, the caveat is that they're in a class, where this is what it's all about. So, we do intend, if we get if we get our implementation grant, to do a more stringent evaluation where people are in less constrained settings. The other thing was that the participants reported an increase in awareness of climate change, and just like the other games we talked about, they have an increased sense of self-efficacy to be able to make a difference. So, you know, this one quote is very nice because it says, you know, the role of the individuals has changed. I now feel like collective actions are important. Some more evaluations. I really like the sort of the Wordle or the word content analysis up above, where people found that it was fun, engaging, informative, and interactive were some of the words that came to mind most often. They encouraged to share their knowledge, and this resulted in this positive peer pressure. And that's what, you know, 61% of the players expressed the benefit of the social interactions. And they said that they were motivated when they saw others having different strategies and watching others. Another one that I found interesting, especially in the context that we're talking about today, is that people who played this wanted to teach others about climate change. You know, it used to be pre-survey about 39% felt that way, and post-survey it was almost double that, you know, to 65%. So we've talked about some specific games that we've either developed or that we've used in our teaching, but there are these other climate games that you may want to consider incorporating. So as I mentioned at the outset, Ginny Brown has a lesson plan on World Without Oil posted on the CAMEL website, and we've worked extensively with Ken Eklund, and there's some really interesting things that you can do with that archived game. Another thing is there's a special issue coming out, and the first articles are planned for publication in June 2012. The guest editors are listed there in case you want to contact them more to find out what's in there. I do have some of Diana Reikian shared with us some of her analyses that's in a summary article, and I'll just show them to you here. So the special issue is looking at everything we've talked about here today. So the basic idea is how do you, use games and simulations about climate change as a pedagogical tool. And she ran the whole, they accepted articles ranging from role plays and simulations to exercise and case studies to internet games and computer simulations. So it's spanning quite a wide range. As background, the lead authors identified 53 games up to August 2011, which was just about the time that we were getting our game started, which is why it was interesting to meet her, and now she's going to include an update in their paper. But anyway, so what they found was, starting with the scale of the games, so it seems like there's about an equal number of local versus global games, and then a mix of those in between. The formats of the games ran the spectrum that we are talking about here, from card games to board games to online games, and then role play and management games and simulations. They looked at the types of developer over the years, going back to 1983, and then they seemed to show a positive correlation with the Climate Summit in Copenhagen. It was interesting to see that private business and consultancies are some of the leading groups that are developing the games. The academic sector was very strong, apparently, during the Climate Summit. The range of climate change issues that were considered, this is also interesting, that a lot of them focused on basic knowledge, and there were different aspects of that. And then a lot of them focused on mitigation as well. And you can see the different aspects there where disaster reduction seemed to be low, and emission trading, which would seem to make for a great game, seems to be underrepresented. So maybe some of you have some ideas about how to handle that. So just to conclude, we feel, based on our proof of concept activities and the research that we've done, that games and game-like interactions really do help adults and students explore complexity and engage their problem-solving capacity. They reach people different people in different ways, and what's neat about them is that they allow for this independent discovery. They can look at trade-offs. People pay attention. There was a game that was developed by some researchers at the Center for Research on Environmental Decisions, and they developed the game initially for a research purpose, and they found that the people wanted to play the game so long that they had to keep the room open longer because they just kept wanting to beat the game. So you really, that's one thing about games, is that people want to follow through and get better at them. Another thing is that the initial issues that we were told about stakeholder engagement and stories and conflict resolution that we heard about from our stakeholders are really important elements. And I think this concluding quote from a student in one of our courses about how they learn skills about how to make decisions and work together through both spatially mapping the different interests and designing concept maps. You can also teach specific skills through games as well. So thank you, and we'd be happy to address your questions. I'll go back to the monitor. Okay, so we had a question that came in. Let me just go back to this. Does this go? Oh, where are we? Sharing the monitor. So I want to go back. Oh, stop sharing. Okay. Okay. So, so how many of these games are collaborative? So basically, right now we have no solitaire version of the game. If you're talking about sort of massively collaborative, the social networking game that Joey Lee has been developing, that's intensely collaborative, and also the Future Coast game that we're talking about would be as well. The other ones are more like a card game or a board game where they're collaborative in that you're working with the people around the table. When we ran them in class, we did put them in groups because we thought that that interaction was helpful as well. Are there other questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead. Yep.
My name's Dave Brooks. I'm an oceanographer at Texas A&M.
Okay.
And I'm going to be teaching a first-year seminar in the fall for about 20 students, and I'm going to base it on the oceanographic themes and Finding Nemo.
Oh.
And which there's a lot of if you've seen the movie. Now, what I'm interested in the gaming perspective is what you've done with the iPad. You mentioned the Polar Explorer. I'd like to know how that worked out, and looking for ways to incorporate that sort of thing in what I'm going to do. Thank you.
Okay, yep. It's a great question. So Polar Explorer, the concept within that was that you notice I talked about game and then game-like. So Polar Explorer came under our game-like heading, which was that our plan with that is to use this Earth Observer. So you could check out Earth Observer if you want to see the foundation for it, where you have access to data. And the developer for that, Bill Ryan, is at Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. So we've been talking with him about developing a polar version of that, so that when there are issues in the news, like people say, oh, the sea ice is greater this year than right now than it was last year, that you could guide people immediately to that, and they could pull up the data. So we were not planning to, in this, what we've proposed right now is not to use the iPad for Polar or in what you would think of as like a card game, board game type format. It was more like we would send people on quests. Can you find this and can you find that? So it would be more along the lines of the challenges that Joey had talked about and promoting access to data. That said, I think Finding Nemo, the location we'll be in, which is the Australian current, right? Or was it the Kuroshio? I forget.
No.
I'm sorry, where?
It's the EAC, dude.
Right, okay, right, yeah. Good accent, too. Yeah, that one, I think, take a look at Earth Observer right now, because you don't need the polar projection for that. So you might find information there, and Bill Ryan, you could Google him at Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. He can help you also with data, because he's very interested in loading other data as well. So he might get interested in the project.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so Dwayne Hampton has about collaborative. Oh, everyone must win together. In other words, if anybody loses, we all lose. Okay, so this was an interesting one. What's really neat about the Arctic Marine Shipping Assessment scenarios is that they have a polar race, and they have a polar saga, and a polar preserve. So the polar race is everyone for themselves. and in that case, people play competitively. So if there's an oil spill in one area, then people are like, all right, you know, you've got a mess, but we've still got our resources. That's not strict. Well, anyway, I can fill you in on that example if you want some more details. But if they draw a different card, then they have to play it collaboratively. If they're in the Arctic Saga or Arctic Preserve, then you have high governance, and so they're playing it from a different standpoint. So we thought that that was an interesting thing to be able to build into it. With the social networking one, I think that almost by definition, it's meant that everybody, you know, is sort of helping each other to win. Now, can the games be modified by users for specific courses? Right. So we're in this, you know, interesting stage right now where we've taken the games pretty far. You know, we're talking to Barnes & Noble. You know, we've got some ideas about commercialization or whatever. You know, what we had said in our proposal is that we would also make versions available online that are probably, you know, more rudimentary, and those, of course, could be, you know, adapted by users for specific courses. I'm trying as much as possible to make the games not so constrained by the development. So, for example, the Arctic and Antarctic Smartic is based on Google Images. And so you could, you know, we have it online right now. You can take a look at it, and you can basically play the game, you know, tomorrow if you want with those. With the Arctic Home and Antarctic Home as well, we have some ideas about how to facilitate others to create these kinds of games for their own ecosystem. Let's just see if there's other ones. Okay, are there other questions? The NAAEE we haven't right now. As I mentioned, so there's a question: have we interacted with other organizations like the North American Association for Environmental Education? So as I just said, you know, we're in this stage right now where we've developed, you know, some of the games are like the Climate Challenge and the CEO2. Anybody can go ahead and use and can adapt. Those are out there. They're publicly available. The polar ones that we're developing, you know, are in this kind of intermediate stage right now, where we're happy to get them tested more, you know, and we're just, you know, hoping that we'll get the funding so that we can start working with others. Let's see. Are there other questions? I don't think I see others. Oh, the Shoreline Change game. Okay. So the Shoreline Change game, the idea behind that is something along the lines of World Without Oil, but it's basically posing the question to people, you know, what would it be like to exist in the world in 2070 when things could be different than they are right now? You know, how would they be different, and where would they be different, and, you know, what kind of stories would you tell? And so we've got a, you know, it's been kind of fun for us to think about, and that one is one of the ones that we would be able to develop more, you know, if we get the grant as well. I'm really excited about it, and I think that it would be something that, you know, even if we don't get the NSF grant, maybe there's some other options to do something about it. Okay, so you have a selection bias in that the students are already interested in environmental issues. Right.
Sure.
Right. So how can the games be used in classes such as Intro to International Relations and other classes where you have different types of students? So maybe you could talk a little bit about the high school students, about, because they were not, oh, those were environmental students as well, right?
Well, I mean, so one thing I did when I was a pre-service environmental science teacher is I taught the class at a school called the High School for Environmental Studies. Now, while it has that name, it's not for students who are specifically interested in science. So it's a whole other conversation about how students select high schools in New York City, but most of them didn't have an interest in it. So when I adapted the case studies as well as the games that I mentioned for the class, I definitely had to keep that in mind. And so, I mean, one of the things that this school has done, which is at the high school level, which is a big movement in a lot of the newer, smaller schools in New York City, is to teach across the curriculum. I know it's also at the collegiate level as well, whereby I had the assistance of a history teacher at one point, and so she came in and she introduced a particular lesson talking about like drought conditions in Southeast Asia and the history of that in Bangladesh, and that was just one small opportunity to do that, but there's plenty of ways to integrate multiple interests across curriculum, and so to use the games in that way, to use the games as bridges to interest students in science. And that was kind of one of the things that I'm hoping to develop further in the future, is how to use these games as ways to get kids excited and interesting about science, technology, and engineering, versus, because a lot of them aren't that interested in it right now, per se.
Yeah, just so the first year seminar class, I mean, they knew I was an environmental professor when they signed up. It's not strictly speaking an environmental class, and so I used the card game, this way Patrick talked about it. But specifically, we ran focus groups, or we ran a focus group with multiple sections for these games, and it was really interesting. I mean, these were people, basically off the street. They had no idea they were coming in for an environmental topic at all, or what they were going to be doing. They just knew that they were coming in to help us out, basically. And I was really astounded at the level of discourse. The adults were so they could bring in their capacity and problem solving from other situations, and they were talking about it. So I was really, very sort of pleased and surprised at how little background information they needed to be able to talk at a high level. The one about the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute, I think the CEO2 game and the Climate Challenge game and the Wedge game, I think those three are the ones that are the best for those, and those are all three publicly available if you just Google those. Let's see. Yeah, and the thing about gaming being a hot topic, I've been at the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences meeting, and they were talking about climate visualization, and they had breakout sessions, and they said, we need to do something more with gaming. Another meeting, people had also talked about how, with respect to STEM, as this person, as Fred Stoff says, that STEM is engaging people in STEM, and is one way to do it is through games where it seems fun, and it seems less kind of constrained and kind of well, people often think of STEM as being dogmatic. I don't think it is, but anyway, it seems more open-ended and more allowing for individuality, and so I think it is a good point to connect with them as well. Are there any other questions?
Stephanie, there is one question I think that you've missed.
Okay.
This person teaches at a tribal college, and they attempt to use the local environment to teach, in order to teach the local. How adaptable are these games? The students are very restricted in their knowledge and understanding of the world beyond the reservation.
Right. So, I mean, one way, initially the way we started these was that we had the students research them themselves. So they could research, just the way SMARTIC is run, they could research the different stakeholder interests in their area, for their geographic region. And they could say, who are the stakeholders who are concerned, and what are the potential climate changes? And then they could play it, but where they roll the dice and see who gets what, and then they could circle it on their own map, So that's, we're trying to make them very open-ended like that. The ecosystem game is the same way, where what they could do is they could create their own, game based on the wildlife or in their local environment, and they could say, okay, what's at the base of the food chain, what goes up, what are some of the stresses, what are some of the options. So I think that would be something that could be very fun. And then once they develop the game, then they could actually play it, And that's one thing that our students, I think, found to be pretty effective. And I think that would be a good approach for your students. Are there any other questions? I think we're just about to the end of the time. Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, go ahead.
Quick question for you. How many students were in your first year seminar?
The first year seminar had 15 students. By design, it's small.
Yeah, okay, that sounds about right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you. Great presentation, Stephanie and Patrick.
Thank you.